You're listening to the Lifestyle You podcast, where we help you achieve a realistic and human approach to health and fitness by working with your body, not against it. My name is Jenna Altman, and my mission is to help you, the active woman, find a healthy lifestyle that you can consistently show up for and make decisions that align with you and your body. Today, we're going to be addressing the question of why your menstrual cycle is so important, signs of a healthy cycle, and ways to actually improve yours. So by tuning into this episode and tracking your own menstrual cycle, this is going to be one of the best ways that we can listen and sync with our own bodies. Today, I have a very special guest joining me. Her name is Danielle Kepcis. She is a physician assistant, master's level trained mental health therapist, fertility educator, nutrition coach, and formal personal trainer. She is madly passionate about helping women lead their healthiest and fullest lives possible through health in your mind, body, and soul. This episode is for you if you aren't sure where to start with your cycle health. It's also for you if you're considering coming off of hormonal birth control and want to know what a healthy cycle should actually look like. And this is also for you if you want to find ways to optimize your cycle health. So as my dear friend and today's guest, Danielle, shares, just because period problems are statistically normal doesn't mean that they're physiologically normal. I am so excited to dive in with you guys today. Can't wait to hear what you think of this episode. Hello, my friends. We are back at the Lifestyle You podcast, and today we have a very special guest. Her name is Danielle Kepcis, and we love to jump right into the good stuff today. So Danielle, you've been a personal trainer, a licensed therapist, now physician's assistant, nutrition coach, and fertility educator. So we got a lot going on. Can you please fill us in as to how and why you originally got into this space in the first place?
Hi, yeah. So my name is Danielle Kepcis. I became a personal trainer because I have been interested in health and fitness my whole life. I've been lifting weights since the age of 12. I'm now 38. I went to school, got a degree in psychology. I've always been really interested in mental health and how the brain works. And I earned my master's degree in counseling psychology. I became a physician assistant. I realized that there was a lot more to medicine than what Western medicine had to offer. And I started really diving into menstrual cycle health because of some of my own issues with under eating, over exercising, losing my period, and that sort of thing, and found individuals like Jolene Brighton and Nicole Jardim, Carrie Jones, and really started learning about the importance of the menstrual cycle as a fifth vital sign. And I also have a PNL1 nutrition certification. And then I became most recently a certified fertility educator through fertility education and medical management. And that is probably the most I've ever condensed like my background into like 2 minutes.
I know there's a lot going on, so it's hard to condense that, but I'm glad you got that out really well. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with under eating and over exercising and really that loss of your menstrual cycle? Because I think a lot of women who listen to this podcast in general maybe have been eating for an extended period of time and maybe don't necessarily realize the implications that can have. So would love to have your side of the story there.
Yeah. So growing up, I was really someone who just ate. I was really a junk food kid. People cannot believe that. I mean, my parents cooked, but I ate a lot of sweets and I didn't even have an awareness of those things. I got really competitive in the CrossFit space, even through CrossFit and all of the kind of like body dysmorphia that like gets kind of messaged through CrossFit. Like I didn't care. I was so focused on my performance. But kind of looking back, I was always kind of over exercising, not intentionally. And it was never, at least in the forefront of my mind, to control my like how I looked. I liked how I looked, and that was always like part of who I was that like I was just always really fit, but it was never like, oh, I'm gonna lift weights or ride bikes because it makes me look this way. Like that was never a part of my story until I hired a nutrition coach when I was 32. Now this was back in 2016, and I like got super shredded super fast. I had never dieted. I never manipulated. I didn't even know what a macro was at that point. And I became extremely obsessive to the point where like I was obsessed with my heart rate getting lower, my weight getting lower. I had travel food scales, travel body weight scales. I would bring those things to events. I was super hyper focused on the way that I looked and the number on the scale. It became very, very disordered. And to be very clear for people listening who don't know me, I was eating 2,000 calories a day. So there were a couple of instances that I had that I would like, they were just big red flags for me of like the way that I was acting, the things that I was saying. I started gaining weight on less food. I started losing my hunger signals. And to be very clear with people, I had the Mirena IUD at this point. I know that like birth control is, I'm not the biggest fan of birth control, but I've used it. So I was not bleeding. I could have been ovulating, but I was definitely not bleeding. So I don't know where I lost my cycle, but when I took my Mirena out, it was around the same time that I started not reverse dieting, but eating food again. Like, I think I went 2 years without having an egg. Like, I want those 2 years of my life back, first of all. And the nutrients in eggs, like, I want those 2 years back. I want all of those eggs back in my life. The butt nuggets, as I call them. So when I started like reintroducing more food and a non-structured way, which I don't recommend to people, it was not, I gained a lot of weight, which needed to happen, to be brutally honest. I took my Mirena out and it took me about 6 months to even have a period back. So that was kind of my journey with under eating. And I was kind of like Jenna, where people were just reinforcing me, like, you look so great and you're so healthy. And oh my God, you eat so many vegetables. And whereas like my palms and soles were orange. So it was not, 12 out of 10 don't recommend.
It's really interesting to me, Danielle, that this happened to you so much later in life. Like, I feel like this is something that often happens for most women, like between, and this could be a generalization, but I feel like it often happens between like 18 to 25. Like, it's kind of like a very specific kind of demographic that this stuff usually happens to. So I'm curious, like, was there anything else going on in life that might have like attributed to this, aside from, just being, because you were still focused on the competition at that point, right?
When I started CrossFit, it was like, I just wanted to lift weight. Like, I was so performance driven. So I think that kind of shielded me in a way during those years of like being so performance oriented. And I also think that I'm not that person who's like, oh, it's your genes, it's your neurogenetics. But like, there is something in me that like, I just have a smaller stature. So like, I was not a subject to being someone who gained weight super easily in college or anything like that. So I think that those things were also helpful. I started counting macros, but during that time, my boyfriend was diagnosed with cancer. So I think that there was probably largely a component of control that wasn't, like, a lot of things that I couldn't control. So that helped, like, what I ate and what I looked like was one of them.
Isn't that interesting? And it's something that I realized even in my journey is how a lot of other factors were at play. I went down that rabbit hole because I needed things that I could control, because everything else in life was uncontrollable, and therefore that gave me control. And I think that's where my issue stemmed from as well. And it's just really something I didn't notice at the time, obviously, but something that I noticed as I work on things in therapy and realize like how some of these things kind of played out. So it's really fascinating, I feel like, to dive down that avenue once you've been in a place where you can visit it comfortably, because it's not always,
totally
not always available.
Like, I started working with a therapist because I'm like, this stuff isn't right. And we've literally talked about food like once. So, and body image, like, it wasn't the problem. Like, if you have a control issue with food and exercise, like, you have a deeper issue and you need to be in therapy.
Yep. Love that. Such a great reminder. No, it really is. And I think, a lot of people that come to me, the happy medium is like, you have a therapist, but you also have me as your nutrition coach, and we can kind of work in tandem. But yeah, it gets challenging because a lot of people do need that additional support. So I want to dive into a little bit more on your cycle health specifically, and then we'll kind of tie into like how people can tune into their own menstrual cycle and what they should kind of be looking for, why it's important to be looking at your cycle, really a lot of common issues and solutions that we see, and then what a healthy cycle should look like. Let's start with just a little bit more background on your cycle and how you kind of got it back into a better place after your experience of, struggling with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had used birth control on and off for like most of my 20s. I had the non-hormonal IUD. I had the Mirena. I used the pill. I had issues. And I had my Mirena removed. I definitely was suffering from something called hypothalamic amenorrhea. So this is basically a disruption in the way that your hypothalamus works and the way that it talks to your anterior pituitary gland, which is they're both structures in the brain that influence how your hormones work, is probably the easiest way that I can say that. And when your body is starving, when you're giving it not enough calories, those areas of your brain don't work right. So that's what was going on with me. And so I had to gain weight. And I sit right now about 130 pounds. I'm 5'4". Before I ever manipulated my body weight, that's exactly where I was. While I was strictly counting macros, I stayed at about 120, 130, but I was 7% body fat. I got my first period back at about the 6-month mark, and then I skipped one, and then it came after 45 days, and then about 33 days. And then I've kind of settled into this like 26 to 28 day rhythm, which the normal length of a cycle, anywhere between 24 and 36 days is normal, but you don't want a whole lot of variance in there. So like if your cycle is normal 26 days or you're bouncing all over the place, like that's not normal either. So you should have like a 2 to 3 day window of like, okay, 1 month I'm 26 and 1 month I'm 28. Now, that's not to say like I had a really wonked out cycle back in June. It was like, I think it was 36 days on the dot, which is abnormal for me, but I was sick. I took a red eye. I flew. There were so many factors that like affected my menstrual cycle that it wasn't like I didn't freak out about it either because I could see the writing on. I'm like, okay, I had a temp spike. It's okay if you have a wonky one here and there. If it's happening once a year, no big deal. But I finally got my cycles regained, and then as time went on, like they started kind of lightening out. So this past March, I finally did my first Dutch test, and my stress levels have been really high in general over the past year. My cortisol was through the roof. I wasn't metabolizing any of it, and then my sex hormones were just in the tanker. So I actually worked with someone myself because I wanted someone to be objective with me. I think it's really important for people to also bring someone on board who aligns with their values, because it's hard for me to find healthcare providers. Like I can't see someone in Western medicine anymore. I just can't. If I go to somebody and say, I want you to help me with my hormone health, they're going to be like, here's a birth control pill, see you later. And I'm going to give them the finger and I'm going to walk out. And that's how that conversation's going to go. So I just have been going through a process of really trying to work on my stress management, lots of the basics, trying to increase my sex hormones at the age of 38 and kind of mitigate my cortisol. And I'm going to take another Dutch test next month. So that's where I am in my journey.
Love that. I'm so glad you shared all of that and just the evolution of your journey, right? So going from, okay, I'm taking birth control to, okay, I'm coming off of this. I want other options. Like, how can I kind of manage this? And I think that actually leads to another great question. What does that other method look like? So if you're not on birth control, like what is a way that women can be paying attention to their cycle so that way they can prevent pregnancy, which that is the main purpose of birth control in the first place,
right?
Which is a great purpose, but there's other options out there. I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, so there's multiple different types of fertility awareness methods. So they all really center around like, how can I pay attention to my body and the signs that it's giving me in order to prevent or achieve pregnancy? I talk mostly about preventing pregnancy because that's my main shtick. My boyfriend has a vasectomy, so I don't have to worry about it. But I do still pay attention to my cycle because it's your fifth vital sign and it's super important to me. So some of the things that we look at is your cervical mucus is a main one. So like, what does it feel like? What does it look like? When do you start seeing it? So like in the first half of your menstrual cycle, you should start seeing a estrogenic type cervical mucus, which is more slippery, wet, lubricative, will build up to like a raw egg white type substance, like right around ovulation. And then in the second half of your menstrual cycle, you produce cervical mucus from progesterone, which is more dry, sticky, can almost look like a yeast infection, like type, like tacky. It's more white and cloudy. So cervical mucus is a big one. If you're not making cervical mucus, that can be a red flag. Like for me, like I'm starting to see more and feel more of that now, which is a really good sign. But I was like, I'm not seeing anything. But the other thing is like LH strip testing. So LH stands for luteinizing hormone. It raises anywhere between 12 and 36 hours before ovulation. So that's really a message that like, if you don't want to be pregnant, you really shouldn't be having sex during certain periods of time when you have a positive LH. It also helps with testing as well. So like for hormone testing, I should say. The other thing that people look at is a temp rise. I love that Oura Ring has partnered with Natural Cycles, which I think is amazing. That's like a brand new thing. So if anyone out there has an Oura Ring, you notice it just says like 0.2, 0.5, like plus this, plus that. Like it doesn't really give you an actual temperature. Well, if you use Natural Cycles, which is an FDA approved app for family planning, your Oura Ring, you just wear it and you don't even have to use a thermometer in the morning. So The reason that we look at this is because once we start producing progesterone, which happens after ovulation, so after that egg is released from that follicle turns into a structure called the corpus luteum, which starts producing progesterone, and it will do that up until about 11 weeks of pregnancy. It naturally talks to your hypothalamus, and it increases your body temperature. That's why a lot of women have some more sleep dysfunction in the second half of their cycle in their luteal phase, because in order to get deep restorative sleep, we need to have like a cool environment. So when our body temperatures are naturally rising, that was one of the symptoms I was having, is my sleep was in my luteal phase, not a good time. Not a good time. So those are kind of the basics of like what fertility awareness is. It is 98% effective when performed perfectly by someone, which is the same as the birth control pill. If you're not taking your pill appropriately, it goes down to typical use, which is like if I miss a day or I take it a couple hours late, you then go down to 88% effectiveness. And fertility awareness methods have much more variance with typical use. So yeah, I think a lot of women are taught that like, oh, this is the rhythm method, or this method that like really wasn't effective, where they just like picked a day on a calendar, like, or assumed women ovulated on day 14, which is a load of crock, because you don't ovulate the same day every month. I'm almost going to guarantee you that every woman is different. None of that is abnormal. Like if you ovulate on day 16 and you ovulated on day 11 last month, like that's okay. Like there's so many factors that go into that. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I love talking about tracking cycles and all the different things that can be tracked as data. And I think the more variables that you're tracking, the more accurate that you can be in all of your predictions of your cycle for that month. And I did just actually get natural cycles probably about a month ago.
Oh, really?
And yes, and I've been loving it. I relatively, based on my body temperature beforehand, and like Aura gives a relative kind of like prediction as to, and they don't really say that it's your ovulation window, but when my temperature is rising, I can pay attention and I know that things are shifting, and also my cervical mucus. And now that I have like the app and just being able to put all that stuff in there, it's really cool. It gives you like a green or a red day. So if you are preventing pregnancy, it'll basically around your ovulation window, which is the time that you can get pregnant. It will give you a red day being like, nope, don't have sex, or well, it says either abstain or use protection. It's just like a peace of mind of like, all right, I got the data to back me up. I know what's going on with my body. And that's so empowering to come from that place and to have that knowledge. And I think
totally,
this kind of stems back into our next kind of question, and a perfect segue of how does nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle play a role in your menstrual cycle?
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this. Is going to be hard for me to boil down. That's why I created an 8-week course for it. So if you want to know the nitty gritty, join my Menstrual Misfits course. Shameless plug.
Yes.
So I think one of the biggest things that I can say with nutrition and exercise is the undereating. The undereating is a big one, and we kind of talked about that in hypothalamic amenorrhea, but also we know that vitamin D behaves more like a hormone than it does a vitamin now, and it plays a large role in fertility, and 93% of Americans are vitamin D deficient. Vitamin A improves the health of your corpus luteum. Vitamin C helps fight off free radical species. Lifestyle, things like taking ibuprofen can impair ovulation, because it can the prostaglandins that we release around the time of ovulation, they serve a purpose and they weaken the follicle wall. And if you take too much ibuprofen, it can impair that. If you have blood sugar imbalance issues, if your diet is crap and your blood sugar is erratic and it's going all over the place, blood sugar will contribute to more testosterone, which contributes to ovulatory cycles pretty much, or more like a PCOS type picture. That doesn't mean you need to have PCOS. Exercise is a stressor on the body. So I love exercise. I'm a very active human, but overdoing it will create that same type of strain on your HPA axis. Not sleeping is a big one. That's not a really recognized stressor. So I'm huge on sleep and sleep hygiene and getting enough of it, because if your body's not repairing, you're in trouble. Your gut health is extremely important. If the liver ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. That's where most of your estrogen metabolism and detoxification occurs, in your liver and then in your gut. So if you have a liver problem, and that doesn't mean that you have to have elevated liver enzymes, but like if you have like a sluggish thyroid, if you have a little bit of elevated cholesterol, if you've got like, if you're not clearing your cortisol, that's all like a sluggish picture that goes into, clearing cortisol goes into like a thyroid issue, but liver issues is a big one that can create menstrual cycle issues that I think a lot of women don't recognize. And alcohol. I haven't had a drink in over 18 months because I just decided it didn't align with my life. I'm not saying that anyone else has to do that, but if you have period problems, the number one thing I'm going to ask you to do is stop drinking booze.
Mm-hmm.
Period. The end. So sorry to burst that bubble for people too, but so those are just like some, like kind of like a snip preview of things that I am pulling off the top of my head of diet, lifestyle, things that really matter with your menstrual cycle.
Yeah, and that's the biggest key, I think, is that this stuff actually does matter and does make a difference. And I think it's funny you brought up the alcohol. I've never been a big drinker at all. And as I've been working on repairing a lot of my own menstrual cycle over the years, it's been, just something that it doesn't really serve a purpose in my life either. And I'll have an occasional glass of wine. I probably drink like 2 drinks a month. And it's just not, like you said, it's just not part of my values. I feel like we're really cool humans without alcohol and like don't need it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and for anybody who's struggling like with gut stuff, alcohol does it's antimicrobial, it's antibacterial. Mm-hmm. If you think about like, I mean, ethanol alcohol is different, the stuff that we ingest, but as opposed to like maybe the cleaner that we're using. But if you have gut issues, that's the other thing. I basically tell people, listen, if you're not willing to give up alcohol, don't even work with me, because you're not going to see improvement, because you're just trashing your intestinal lining. And that doesn't have to be forever either. Like I do not believe that people like need to give up alcohol forever. Like, let me be really clear with that. But if you're in a stage of like, I'm having some significant dysfunction and we really think it's related to the gut, I can throw all the supplements and lifestyle like things to do in your lifestyle that we want, but it's going to be like trying to fill up a sink with an open drain.
For someone who does have a menstrual cycle, who maybe has some complications, whether it's, bad cramps, a heavy flow, is there anything like from a natural perspective as a general sort of recommendation? And again, like this, guys, you might have underlying issues and that, these are just generalized kind of.
Yeah, like there may be like you may have endometriosis and I can't I'm not diagnosing anyone, but there are some general things that I do love for overall menstrual cycle health. The first is magnesium glycinate. Magnesium glycinate specifically because it is the most bioavailable to our bodies. It's important in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. It helps with blood sugar regulation, which blood sugar issues can contribute to menstrual cycle issues. And then also it helps with blood pressure regulation. But with the menstrual cycle, it is probably my most favorite thing. It is so calming. It's a cofactor in methylation. It is involved in so many different processes in our menstrual cycle that I think every human being should be taking it. Measuring it in the blood is kind of wonky because most of the magnesium that we have is actually intracellular. So measuring it becomes like a weird thing. Like I will measure it on people, and if they're deficient, I'm like, oh, you're really screwed. Like we're really in a bad place here. So I love magnesium glycinate anywhere between like 300 milligrams and 1,000 milligrams. It's also great for migraines. It's great in the perimenopause time. Helpful with sleep, relaxation, anxiety. I mean, I just literally think everyone should be taking mag glycinate, period, the end. Again, not medical advice, and check with your personal practitioner, but general information. The second of those would be something like a B complex. B complex is deeply involved also in, I believe in methylation, but also in our estrogen metabolization, and so important it's a precursor for a lot of neurotransmitter development. So lots of people who have like PMS, PMDD, if you are a vegan, my God, please take a freaking B complex. I would also look into something like taurine if you are in the perimenopausal time and you are having sleep issues. So magnesium and taurine can be really helpful for perimenopausal sleep issues. Zinc is another one. Zinc is really deeply involved in the menstrual cycle processes. I also think that it is involved in methylation, which is basically just a process of like how our DNA works and if it's like good or bad. It's like the best way that I can explain methylation, because there's so much about methylation I don't understand, but it's also involved in our estrogen detoxification process. So those are 3 kind of supplements that I in general do think that most people can benefit from them. If you want to take something that's more whole food based, you can do, the brand is called Smidge, and they have like an oyster product and then they have a beef liver product, and they have like all of those vitamins that like are found in beef liver and oysters that we don't normally get a lot of. So you could replace like the vitamin A, B, and the zinc with those things. Another thing that is really important is blood flow. So if you don't get blood to the area, you do not get the nutrients to the area. So something else that I love is castor oil packs. Castor oil packs are great for constipation, making sure you're having a daily bowel movement. If you're not having a daily bowel movement, those individuals typically have an estrogen dominance. And that's things like I have breast tenderness, I have heavy periods, oh my God, I'm having clots and this and that, and I'm itchy, or like histamine type symptoms. So castor oil packs are great. I bought mine from the Queen of Thrones website. It was like $80 for the thing of castor oil and the pack. So that is something that I think is, I mean, you're going to have to spend some money for it, but those are a couple of like general recommendations that I think are great to help with like pelvic health and menstrual cycle health that, most people can do.
Yeah. And the castor oil packs are usually around the time of your cycle, almost like when the cramps are happening, or is it like a precursor kind of?
It depends on what you're using it for. So castor oil can enhance like the blood flow, and it also helps with enhancing bowel movements as well. It can be helpful with cramps. So I usually do mine 2 to 3 times a week. I'll just sleep with it on. It will stain. So I have like dedicated clothing that I wear when I do throw that on. So I do really like that. I found benefit from it. And just liver support. I mean, God, there's so many things that I can say that like, and it also just depends, right? Like, it literally depends on like what is going on with your personal picture. But in general, I think that most people need some liver support. I'm not a fan of like detox teas and things like that, but our liver is very bombarded. It's working very hard. So I personally take a supplement that I will probably continue to take. It's called Liver GI Detox. It's got like milk thistle, NAC, alpha lipoic acid. I think it's got like okra or artichoke. It's got like a lot of good stuff for the liver and gut support. So that is something that I will probably continue to take as a maintenance. But overall, I mean, also just like making sure you're eating a healthy diet. I am all about food first, and I am an ambassador for Legion. I'm an ambassador for Biome. So I believe in supplementation. But if you are not doing the basics, like you can forget it. Like, because the other thing is also stress management. I think that stress management is so underrated, and just having restorative time. Because the HPA axis and the HPO axis are just so tightly wound together, and they impact each other so much that if you're not dealing with your stress, I'm sorry, but a multivitamin's not going to help that.
Totally. And I'm also really glad that you like hit it from a few ends, right? Like, yes, the supplementation is helpful, but also like the food first approach, as well as like all the other things that you can do from a lifestyle perspective. Like, I think that we get so caught up on like the supplementation, but I think it's important because supplementation does and can play a role, but it's also like in conjunction with all of the basics as well. So having all of the other things kind of nailed down, which is why like I did not start taking supplements until like 13 years into my, my health and fitness journey, because they didn't have a purpose yet, because I was still building a lot of the foundational things. So anyway, love that you brought all of that up. So something that we really love to emphasize at the Lifestyle You podcast is the importance of working with your body and not against it. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can utilize the menstrual cycle as an important piece of that puzzle of working with your body.
So I'll start with the most obvious, or at least it's the most obvious to me, is that a missing period is a problem. I mean, there are technical definitions for this with like primary and secondary amenorrhea, and like, so if you've had a regular menstrual cycle and you miss 3 in a row, that is a problem and that needs investigated. If you've had an irregular menstrual cycle, you're someone like with a PCOS type picture that's not controlled, and you miss 6, that is also a problem. And of course, we're always wanting to rule out pregnancy. But some of the secondary causes of secondary amenorrhea are things like celiac disease, thyroid problems, vitamin and nutrient deficiencies, gut dysregulation. Are you diabetic? Do you have blood sugar imbalances? So there's a lot of things that can be going on with your health if you have a missing menstrual cycle. So there's a reason why why ACOG made it the 5th vital sign. So examples of other vital signs are like your heart rate, your blood pressure. So your menstrual cycle is right up there with that. So we really need to be paying attention to that. So if it goes missing, that's a huge red flag, and I definitely want to be looking into that. Heavy, painful periods, while it's statistically normal, it is not physiologically normal. And I want to say that again to people. while heavy, painful, and, PMS and all of this stuff is statistically normal, it is not physiologically normal. Your body is meant to function properly. And I feel like we have created an environment and a lifestyle with which our bodies cannot sustain normal functioning, which is so sad. And it just makes me enraged in a whole other level, because I feel like, for my average patient, they're coming in and they're like rushing their kids to school. They're not eating breakfast. They're sucking down their Frappuccino or their venti whatever from Starbucks. And then they're working through lunch, and maybe they stop at the snack bowl or order McDonald's or order fast food. And then they get home and they're taking care of their kids and driving them all over the place, feeding them, but not feeding themselves. And therefore it's like 7 o'clock and we've had 900 calories and 800 of it was garbage. And maybe we had a few nuts within our trail mix at our coworker's desk. I mean, this is, and I say it, this, she's not editing this. Like, I'm literally saying this fast and off the cuff because it is such a familiar story to me. So I'm getting back to heavy, painful periods. So these could be things, whether it's endometriosis, it's an estrogen detoxification problem, you have fibroids, you have, adenomyosis, other types of things that are going on with, like, why are you having heavy, painful periods? Is it a vitamin deficiency? Is it multiple things? Just because you have PCOS doesn't mean you can't have endometriosis too. But I think one of the things that I love to point out, I know that this isn't exactly what you asked, but I want to go there just for a second about PCOS and endometriosis. Endometriosis is mostly a disease of immune dysfunction that shows up in hormones, and its hallmark is heavy, painful periods with irregular bleeding in between. PCOS is infrequent ovulation and infrequent cycles with things like body hair, high testosterone, insulin resistance. Heavy, painful periods are not a symptom of PCOS, and I see that confused all the time. But those are some things that can just be going on if our menstrual cycle is awry. And we're now finding out that a lot of women, I can't remember the percent, but a large percent of women who have PCOS are also suffering from non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So, like, their liver's being impaired. So, like, well, shit, that's where all of our estrogen's being metabolized. So now they're getting double whammy because their liver's jacked and it's not getting the love that they need. And they're insulin resistant. And so they're gaining weight. And the more adipose tissue you have, the more estrogen you're producing. And it's all tied together. I could go on and on.
No, but that's exactly why we need to learn how to work with our bodies and not against them, because of all the things that can go awry if we're not paying attention to what the body is telling us. Our body is always communicating with us.
If you're missing menstrual cycles or you have period problems, that's a red flag. And if you're not working with a practitioner who respects it, that's a red flag. Find someone else. Come work with me online. Work with someone else. I don't care who you work with, but the birth control pill is not an answer. It's a Band-Aid, and Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes, people. They just don't. Like, if you stop taking that pill and you still have the same problems, like, it's not a solution. It's a Band-Aid. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. Like, I'm here for that. I'm not here to diss anybody for the choices that they make or what works for their lifestyle. I just want people to be informed about, like, this is what this is doing and it's not fixing anything, and understand the risk factors that come with that use, and especially if it's long-term use.
I'm glad that you clarified that and shared that, because I think that's the missing component. And that's why we're here. That's why we have this episode. I love it. Awesome. So we're going to close out with our food for thought. So this is where we just share the main takeaway, like a tactical, tangible action that people can take when they're listening to this episode. And if it was like one thing that they could kind of take away, what would that be?
I would say take magnesium. If you're going to do one thing, again, talk to your doctor first. It's not medical advice. I'm going to give a couple. So I would say take the magnesium, make sure you're getting enough sleep, and make sure you're getting enough, like, stress reduction time, because your stress system is so tightly wound into all of your health, not just your menstrual cycle health. But everything from blood sugar regulation to your menstrual cycle and everything in between. If you start to have signs of blood sugar dysregulation and you don't address it, like, it can go south pretty fast. So
perfect. I feel like we all have very similar food for thoughts week over week, which hopefully is reinforcing the concepts that we are sharing on this podcast, which is great. So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can find my website, www.empoweredmedicine.co. So it's .co, not .com. You can find me on Instagram at DMKep underscore. So DMKEP underscore. So, yeah, hit me a DM, connect with me. I'm happy to be a part of anybody's health journey.
Love it. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. I hope you guys got tons of value out of this episode, and let us know what you think, and definitely connect with Danielle. She's got lots of good stuff to share with you guys. So we will be chatting soon. Thank you for listening to the Lifestyle You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and review to help others discover the magic we're creating together. If there's someone in your life who could benefit from listening to this episode, be sure to forward it along to them. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jenna Ray Altman for more helpful content, resources, and good vibes. As always, thank you so much for being here.